So you see in the chart here that we have the denials on the left, the first, the second and the third, the 4 Gospels, and then we have a column that's the destination where this denial occurred in the Gospel and the people who were involved. So let's start with the first denial and go to the destination column. So you can see here that Matthew, Mark and Luke, the synoptics, say it happened at the fire in the courtyard. But then John is differing here. He's saying it's at the courtyard entrance gate. And I actually explained this in the previous video I did in the Gospel Sync series, and it's part 2 of how I synchronize the Gospels, where I stated that John mentioned that when Peter came to the gate with the other disciple who was known to the high priest, this disciple went in to get permission for Peter to be allowed in. And while the girl was looking at him at the gate, in John she says, "You're not one of his disciples, are you?" And Peter denied it. But when we look at this more deeply, we realise that this was in fact the girl that did say that to Peter, who did ask him the first denial, but she actually did it in the firelight later on. However, John wasn't going to mention her then, so he has put the first denial earlier than it actually occurred, because that girl was included in the story at that time. So we see here, when you look at the people involved, that all 4 of them state that it was this servant girl. The only difference is, as I've stated earlier, that the synoptics are clear that this occurred around the fireplace. So she's led him into the gate, she's gone off duty, she's come back later on, and she's walking by, and she's seen him for the second time, and she's like, I'm pretty sure you're one of his disciples. Another small detail that Matthew adds here is that when Peter denied Christ here, he actually denied it in such a loud voice that everyone seated around the fireplace heard him say it. So then if we go down to the second denial and look at the destinations, we see that Matthew and Mark are very consistent here, that Peter ran off to the palace gateway, or the front porch. And here we actually see Matthew and Mark use 2 different Greek words. So once again, we prove there's a minor detail where they've chosen a different Greek word, which essentially means the same place, but it shows that they're not copying from one another. So you could call it the entryway, the palace gate, or the front porch to the whole enclosure. And the reason Peter's quickly ran off to this gate is because he wants to make a quick escape if necessary. He's starting to get fear and he's concerned about people are onto him. We see here that Luke doesn't mention the destination, and John's saying that this second denial was actually around the courtyard fire. So he seems to be one step behind again here. Looking at the people involved, Matthew says it's another servant girl, whereas Mark says it's the same servant girl, and Luke says a man was involved as well. And John, it's a group setting where all standing around the fire accuse Peter. So how do we reconcile this? Well, it's pretty clear to me that Matthew and Mark are correct in saying that Peter has now rushed off to the entryway, the palace gateway. So we're going to have Peter located over there. So the way I would reconcile John's account of the people standing around the courtyard fire is potentially when this servant girl accused Peter, they were still around the fire and they could overhear the whole conversation because it was a close enough distance from the fire. That's one possibility, we can't be sure. The other reasoning I would have is that when these people saw Peter rush off after the first accusation, they were very intrigued by it, and so they all slowly meandered across and ended up over at the gateway to the palace entry as well. Now we have another servant girl, the same servant girl, or a man. So we could say that all 3 potentially accused Peter over here and this second denial, but I don't think that's the most realistic option. We definitely have to include a girl and a man because they're different sexes. So what I've done here is, where Mark said it's the same servant girl, I think that Mark's alluding back to what John said, that this same girl did see Peter twice. If you recall in John, she saw him first at the gate, and then when she saw him and looked closely the second time, she accused him. And I think because Mark didn't include the bit about the palace gate, he's overheard some understanding that this girl saw Peter twice. So he's positioned her at the firelight in the first denial, and then also accusing Peter over at the palace gate. But I would say that that's probably the least likely that she did that. I would say John is correct that she saw him at the gate and then she's already accused him that one time. So I'm going to go with Matthew, who said it was another servant girl that recognised Peter, and then the man that was alongside also chimed in. And after he chimed in, all the people who were standing around the fire, whether they were at the fire or had all moved across to the gate, all said in one accord, "You aren't also one of his disciples, are you?" So in this second denial, Peter this time declares it with an oath. And he says, "Men, I am not, I don't know the man." So once again, Peter is claiming, I don't even know him at all. I've never even seen him. I've never interacted with him. I am completely a stranger to Jesus. So that's the reconciliation of the second denial. Now let's head to the third denial. If we look at the location, once again, Peter's still right at that gate. He's right at the entryway under the front porch because he is ready to run. He is ready to bolt because he is panicking. And Luke and John both don't mention it. So it's clear that this third denial is at the palace gate. And we've already put the second denial also at this gateway. So now if we go across to the people involved, both Matthew and Mark just talk about a group of bystanders who all accused him together in one accord. Luke says it was another man. And John tells us who this man was. He says he was the high priest's servant and he was a relative of Malchus, who was the man who had his ear chopped off by Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane with the sword, and Jesus healed him. So we have a relative of this man called Malchus who says, "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" So he was an eyewitness that Peter was there at that moment when he chopped his cousin's ear off. So that covers Luke and John, another man and the high priest's servant. So now, once again, all the bystanders have to join in one accord from Matthew and Mark. And they say, in Mark they say, "Surely you're one of them, for you are a Galilean." And Matthew adds the detail that they said, "And your accent gives you away." So they knew he was most likely with Jesus because he had a Galilean accent and it gave him away because he's in Judea and he's talking differently. So on this third denial, Peter actually calls down curses on himself and swears to them, "Listen everyone, I don't know this man you're talking about." And that's when the rooster crowed the second time. And the most riveting part of this is that Luke states in verse 61 that the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. And I think that that image of Jesus turning and locking eyes with Peter would have impacted Peter for the rest of his life in a deeply profound way, because he would have never wanted to deny his Lord again, and he would have never wanted to be unfaithful in such a way for the rest of his life. And after the third denial, we know what happens. He locks eyes with Jesus and then he runs out the palace gates and weeps bitterly. So there you have it, people. That's how I analysed all that information coming from the 4 distinct Gospels and reconciled it into only 3 denials. And so now, to conclude this video, I'd like to read for you event 221 from Gospel Sync, the greatest story ever told, which is Peter disowns Jesus. As Simon Peter was below in the courtyard, watching all this unfold, the servant girl of the high priest, who had let him in at the gate, came by and saw him seated there, warming himself in the firelight. She looked closely at him and remarked, "You were one of those men who were with that Nazarene Jesus from Galilee. Aren't you one of this man's disciples?" But he denied it before them all. "Woman, I am not. In fact, I don't even know him, nor do I understand anything you're talking about." Then he sprinted toward the palace gate, and as he did this, a rooster crowed. Peter stood at the entrance under the front porch, trying to keep himself warm. He was eager to stay and find out the result of the trial, but he was also ready to make a quick escape if necessary. It wasn't long before another servant girl saw him standing there, and said to the men standing by, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." Someone else chimed in, "I agree, you are indeed one of them." So they asked him, "You aren't also one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it again, this time with an oath. "Men, I am not. I don't know the man." About an hour later, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" Those standing near asserted, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean and your accent gives you away." Again Peter denied it, calling down curses on himself and swearing to them, "Listen everyone, I don't know this man you're talking about." At the very moment he spoke this, the rooster crowed the second time. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then he remembered the words Jesus had spoken to him. "Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he went outside, broke down, and wept bitterly.